Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So moving
It's
forward,
sad
man,
that he was.
people
Yeah,
people need to get out and vote. Um,
right.
the elephant in the room, as far as American society, for the last few weeks, has of course been police brutality.
Right.
It's not a. I'm no one in the black community was surprised about this. I mean, we know that this thing has been going on for forever. With the advancement of technology now, it's getting caught on camera a lot more. So other people are getting to see not just the police brutality,
Yep.
but like some of the other just kind of public racial incidents with some of these people confronting black people for doing mundane things like sitting in the park and challenging whether you live in a particular building and stuff like that. So we're beginning to see it on social media now. So I kind of roll. I think we can roll police brutality and maybe justice system reform together because I think they go. I think they go hand in hand. You probably agree with that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say because as far as police brutality, I think what I've seen as being a major problem is the fact that our police departments have been so militarized, right? So they're operating like they're occupying army. They're being trained like soldiers. They've been provided with military equipment. They're telling them they're in a war. They're pointing to different areas of the country, mostly in the city, and saying this is the war zone, and pointing to the people in those areas and saying those are the enemy combatants. Well, if you train them like a soldier, you tell them they're in a war, drop them in a so-called war zone, you identify an enemy, you should expect them to act like they're in a war. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing the way they approach just even some of the peaceful protests that we have seen. They've approached it as if it's they're in the middle of a that Spartan movie. You know what I mean? And it's like
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
it's I think it's shined a light, but it's also highlighted some of the deep issues within how we police in this country. What do you think? What do you think should, as far as some of the policy changes that can take place to try to change the way the police uh, interact with the community, and specifically our community, the black community?
Well, I don't think it's well. It's hard for me to answer the policy change
Mm-hmm.
issue topic because there's so many different policies that could be changed, and then there's policies that are being broken.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for one, as we just saw, Breonna's law in Louisville, with with the choking, police choking, that's clearly a very dangerous, very unnecessary tool that police officers use is choking.
Right.
And the videos we see are usually with black men, and so I think that's a good policy that has been changed. One thing that I've always wanted to do a documentary on, and is a huge issue that not a lot of people talk about, why is there a shoot to kill policy? So think about it, Rod. You're trying to train someone to shoot to kill, if you shoot them, kill them, but also render aid.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
It's a contradiction.
Right,
So
right. If I shoot to kill you, I'm not gonna try to then save you.
right.
That's why a lot of these officers get in trouble after an arrest or after a shooting because they don't render aid. And it's like, oh, why didn't you render aid? Well, because they shot to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
You shoot to eliminate the threat instead of like, okay, shooting them in the leg or shooting them. Obviously, if that person has a gun, shoot to kill them to get rid of to end that. But a lot of times they don't know, and you're shooting them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and they were never a threat at all,
Yeah.
let alone even a little bit. So I think the shoot to kill policy needs to change. I think the chokehold policy needs to change if there's any other cities that have it that haven't removed it. Um, I'm trying to think what else. Any like you know over policing of black neighborhoods needs to stop. I think actually a good friend of mine told me this, and this blew me away. He's been seeing a lot of my content on social media, which has been focused towards a lot towards police, and do a ride along with me sometime. He said there's one neighborhood where A lot of times there's people riding through with their bikes or whatever, and people will call the cops on them, say, oh, there's someone in our neighborhood we don't recognize. And he said 99 times out of 100 or 99% of the time, it's a black person.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he told his officers to stop going to those calls.
Right.
He's a white man. And I told him, thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
Like, that's some real shit. And that hurt my heart that, like, there's all these racist ass people in these neighborhoods that are calling. I mean, that's one neighborhood in Florida. Imagine how many neighborhoods there are across the country calling the cops on black people walking in a neighborhood. There is no crime against walking in a neighborhood, unless it's like a gated neighborhood or something like that. There's no policy against walking in an open neighborhood. If you're on the sidewalk, that's public property.
Mm-hmm.
I know you believe in your house and whatever, but it's called public property.
Yeah, we see a lot of those encounters with police end badly when it's a minority or specifically African American. So I don't think that some of these people that are placing these calls really are considering what the end result can be, because they don't have those types of experiences with the police. So
right.
it's easy for them to say, hey, the police are going to go and or believe that the police are just going to, you know, check and make sure that you're not up to anything, you're not in the process of committing a crime or anything. They're not really thinking this can end really bad. It can end in a George Floyd type situation. And I think,
yeah, you're right. They may not have the worst of intentions, but you know, they need to understand that it can happen that way.
Yeah, and we have to raise the awareness that that, you know, when you're calling the police for these sort of mundane things, that particularly when it's a minority involved, that it could end super badly. People have been talking about defunding the police, right? I think that was sort of a misstatement when they first started saying defund, and they probably mean more sort of reorganize and change the approach. And I definitely think that's one of the fundamental changes that needs to be made, as far as overhauling the mission, the vision, and just the approach to policing communities of color. Maybe making sure I've heard something. One of the things that's been mentioned a lot over the years when it comes to policing communities of color has been to try to get as many officers to be from that community. So rather than having, you know, have them live in the community, be from that community, so they kind of have an understanding of how things operate in that community, versus rather having some person that really doesn't have a lot of experience dealing with communities of color. Isn't familiar with the dynamics of that particular community and neighborhood, and then dropping them there and asking them to police those people. I think that's one of the fundamental changes. I definitely agree with that. I think that would have a huge impact. But another thing, you know, me with my counseling background and psychology background, I've always wondered why mental health counseling or having some sort of counseling isn't mandatory for police, but not even just for police, but for first responders. I know when I was counseling full time, I had a colleague that I would meet with at least twice a month, usually once a week, but at least twice a month, just to talk to and decompress. Because carrying those, you know, you listen to 6, 7, 8 people tell you their problems for 5 days, and that has to, it's difficult to walk around with that baggage. So it wears on you.
That's the way on you.
And you got to be able to decompress and get that off your chest. So just imagining a police officer who operates in the belly of society and sees all kinds of things that the general public doesn't see, and who has multiple interactions per day, probably most of them negative. No one likes to see, you know, most of the time if the police are coming, it's not for a good reason. It's usually something that's happening, something bad happening. So they're probably having a lot of interactions with people that aren't the nicest towards them. And then you take all of that and roll it up over the course of a week, you got to have some way to let that go. I mean, we know that alcoholism and domestic abuse are high. They're at the top of the list when it comes to alcoholism and drug abuse and domestic abuse. And that's the negative way of releasing all of that baggage. So what are your thoughts as far as maybe police departments requiring that officers participate in some sort of counseling?
Yeah, I love that. You know, you have the background of psychology, so I think what you said is spot on. You know, as a former TV reporter, I was, you know, what word am I looking for? Faced you know, with, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I was like, you know, firsthand account affected by a lot of the horrible things you hear about in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Pulse nightclub shooting. You know, I was there.
Right.
I was there when it was going down because I was called to the story. So I had to see the crime scene tape. I saw the bullets that the FBI shot at the wall. You know, or I saw the bullet holes in the wall. I saw, you know, the family members crying. I mean, I was up close and personal to that story, one of the worst stories in American history. And then you take that, there's so many little smaller stories, like one person killed here, two people killed here, three people killed here. Um, and then a lot of times I'm not just covering those stories when they happen, I'm following them for the 2, 3, 4, 5 year time period that they go on, such as the trial if someone's arrested, or, you know, the memorials. So you're continually facing these traumatic incidents on a consistent basis. A lot of journalists don't handle that, and then they sort of have these breakdowns. So towards the end of my career, Rod, and I haven't told a lot of people this, and I talked about it on an Instagram live a week ago. I had a lot of issues when I ended my career 2 years ago as a reporter. I started really feeling it and getting affected by it post career. Like, dang, I should have been addressing that stuff along the way, but it didn't affect me as a young cub reporter. It didn't affect me when I was in it. But towards the end, I was like, man, I don't want to go cover this mass shooting. I don't want to go cover this one. I don't want to go do that story, you know? And that's a big deal when you're a reporter and you don't want to go cover the big story. That's a really big deal.
Yeah.
So I should have been getting that help along the way. My colleagues should have been getting that help along the way. And I say that all to say that first responders have it worse than reporters and journalists. You know, we may see a dead body from afar. They're up close and personal investigating it, touching it, you know, having to call the family members and talking to them first. So they should absolutely have counseling on hand and have mandatory counseling sessions to address those things, because you may not know you're affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
You may not know something will make you trigger, you know, until it's too late.
Absolutely. Uh, Not saying that it would change. I definitely think it would have an impact as far as how we see some of the violence that the police perpetuate, as it pertains to minorities and just to the community in general and how they police. But every little bit, you know, every little policy change or anything you can implement to change just a little bit and move it towards a better relationship between the community and the police, I think that's a good thing. And I believe that mandatory counseling is a good place to start.